was on the highway patrol, I'd only been on, oh goodness, I don't know, 8 months or a year. I had not been on very long. It was summertime. I was out riding my bicycle when I was stationed in Lancaster County. I had on short pants, I had on a tank top. I was riding my bicycle for exercise, and I was coming upon a community swimming pool. Just before I got to where the swimming pool was, there was someone that was pulling out of the swimming pool, and there was a lot of people there. And this person apparently wanted to show out. And so they hit the accelerator really hard. The rear end of their vehicle spun around. They lost control, and the car slid into the ditch. All in front of me, a highway patrolman who had no identification on, no badge, just short pants and a tank top. And because of my, I'm thinking, lack of experience, I pulled my bicycle right up to where that car was. And just as I pulled up, a beer can was thrown out the window. And so anyway, the guy climbs out of the car and he says, man, he said, this can't get any worse. And I said, sure it can. I said, you could have done it in front of a highway patrolman that's out riding his bicycle for exercise. When I said that, his eyes got large, he dropped his head. And then, again, due to lack of experience and so forth on my part, I said, could I see your driver's license? Well, due to his lack of experience, he said, sure, and handed it to me. But anyway, he handed me his driver's license, and I looked to see if there's any damage on the car, and there was not. And he said he could get some friends to help him pull it out. And I told him, I said, well, here's what I want you to do. I said, my shift starts at 3 o'clock today. I said, I want you to meet me at the highway department at 3 o'clock. And I said, I expect you to be there. And he said, okay. So I looked at his name and memorized his name, and I got on my bicycle and pedaled as fast as I could, got to the house, wrote his name down, and looked at my watch and backed the time up 5 minutes and wrote that down because you need the time of the incident to write a ticket. So anyway, I eat lunch and take a shower, put on uniform, I go to work. I'll come into the office, and there he is waiting in his car outside the office. And I tell him, I said, walk in with me if you don't mind. He walks in the office. I set my books down on the desk, and he looks. On the top of that is his name. And he saw that, and he said, you know, I almost didn't come. He said, but I just had a feeling that you'd remember my name. And I told him, I said, well, you made a good decision. I said, instead of reckless driving, I'm just going to charge you with improper start, which doesn't take any points away. I said, so I want to give you a benefit for the fact that you did come and not make me have to look you up. Well, my name is Richard Coleman. I'm the pastor at Shepherd Church of the Nazarene in Lexington, South Carolina, and it's great to spend just a few moments with you today. I've been looking in the Old Testament, and I enjoy looking at the life of Moses. And Moses starts his life out at a time where Pharaoh has said if there's any baby boys that are born, they need to be thrown into the Nile. And after keeping him a secret for 3 months, his mother finally realizes we're going to have to do something. And so they get a waterproof basket, and they put Moses in that basket and float him down the Nile. But they didn't just do that. They had a daughter also, and her name was Miriam. And they said, Miriam, how about keep an eye on this basket, if you will, as he floats down the Nile, so maybe you can tell us what happened to him. And so Miriam is creeping down, watching what's going on, and a ways down the Nile, the Pharaoh's daughter is taking a bath. And she sees this basket, and maybe possibly hears a baby cry, and she gets her attendants to go out there and retrieve the basket. And when they see this little 3-month-old baby, she was just overtaken with this baby and thought, oh, this is just such a precious baby. And then she probably, the Bible doesn't tell us, it's pretty direct and brief in what it tells us about it, but I imagine Pharaoh's daughter is probably talking to her attendants and probably saying, oh man, I wish I could keep the baby, but you know, in order to do that, I'd have to find a mother that was at the place where she'd be able to nurse the baby, and how would I ever be able to do that? And Miriam is over there on the side, and I imagine she hears all of this. And so Miriam comes out and she says, "Excuse me." She said, "But I heard you talking, and I heard you saying that you would need possibly a woman that would be able to nurse this baby." She said, "I know a woman that would be able to nurse this baby." And the Pharaoh's daughter said, "Really?" Said, "Well, could you get her for me and let me talk to her?" And she said, "Sure." And so she goes and she gets her mother, and she brings her mother to Pharaoh's daughter. And Pharaoh's daughter says, "Would you be willing to take this baby and nurse this baby until the baby is weaned?" And can you only imagine the thoughts that would have been going through this baby's mind, this baby's mother's mind, and thinking, "Well, you better believe I would. I mean, this is like the greatest thing ever." And so she took the little baby, and she took the baby home with her, and she was able to keep the baby. And the Bible doesn't really say, but I imagine probably until the baby started eating table food. I think about Miriam in this story, just a young girl. Miriam kept her eyes on her little brother. She probably didn't know when to react. I mean, what if the baby got caught up in rapids? What if an alligator came along? What if this? What if that? And I'm sure she was going through not knowing what might happen. But what did happen was Pharaoh's daughter found that baby. And suddenly, Miriam found herself at a place where she could ask a very common sense question that might be helpful. And she just came up and said, "I can find someone. Would you like for me to do that?" And what I see in that in today's world is that Miriam didn't have to be somebody else. Miriam didn't have to go beyond her abilities. She was just a young girl. I mean, she didn't have that much knowledge of life. But God was able to use her with what she knew, the amount of education that she had, the practical experience that she had. God was able to use her existing abilities. And I just wonder, can God use our existing abilities? You know, I think sometimes we believe that the only person that can make a difference in God's kingdom might be the pastor, or it might be a missionary, or it might be somebody with these special talents that God has seemed to give some people. But you know what? I truly believe that God can use everyone with the abilities and the gifts that He has given them. And I don't believe that it necessarily requires all the time for us to thrust ourselves into a situation where we're uncomfortable. I have found in my life personally that whenever I ask God to bring someone into my life that I might be able to be a witness for, or if I already have someone in mind, "God, would you open the door for me to be able to talk to this person about spiritual things?" I have found that if I consistently pray that way, that God does just that. I've had people come to me and ask me spiritual questions that I never thought that they would have done that. And that little light bulb will go off in my head and saying, "Wow, God has just answered my prayer. I need to make sure that I'm able to step forward at this point." And if the same thing happens to you, you don't have to be an expert in the Bible. You don't have to know every scripture. You don't even have to have any memorized. If you will just answer their question to the best of your ability and tell them what God has done in your life, it might be amazing to you how God can use that. Miriam just used her abilities. She stepped forward at the right moment and said, "I believe I know someone that could do that." And God was able to continue His plan in Moses' life. Not only that, but continue His plan in saving an entire nation. All because she kept her eye on the basket and she stepped forward at the right time. Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you. May you keep your eyes open throughout this new year for the opportunity that God has for you. Thanks for taking the time and viewing today.